Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the hearings of the International Commission of Inquiry on Systemic Racist Police Violence Against People of African Descent in the United States. These hearings are a process by which witnesses can present accounts of the unjustified killings and maimings of Black individuals by police officers in the United States before an international panel of human rights experts. We will now begin the hearing in the case of Henry Glover. My name is Priscilla Ocen. I'm a professor of law at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, and I am the rapporteur for today's hearing. Presiding over the hearing is Commissioner Arturo Fournier of Costa Rica. The witnesses for today's hearing is Mr. Anthony Wilson. This hearing will be about 50 minutes. Witnesses will testify, followed by questions from commissioners. I will call time at about 30 minutes and 45 minutes, so apologies if I have to interrupt you in order to do so. Commissioner Fournier, I want to present to you our first witness, Attorney Courtney Wilson. Mr. Wilson, can you just confirm your name for the record?
Sure, Courtney Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And do you promise that your testimony before the commission today will be true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. You can proceed with your comments.
Well, first thing I'd like to do is thank the commission for inviting me. Hopefully I can make a contribution to tonight's proceedings. I thought that since my background in New Orleans is interesting, I might just briefly tell you a little bit about me. I'm 76 years old. I've had almost an exclusively civil rights practice for 50 years. My family's been in and around New Orleans in the river region for 225 years. If you've ever been to the French Quarter or the downtown business district in New Orleans, you've seen buildings that my family has put up. We've been here as good sheep and black sheep. If you've been upriver to Destrehan Plantation, where slaves captured after the failed 1811 slave revolt were tried, convicted, sentenced to death and decapitation, you've been to family property, because we married into the family that married into the family that married into the family that owned Destrehan Plantation. If you've read the ceramic replica of the death warrants for that slave trial behind the plantation, you've read, in a manner of speaking, family literature, because again, we married into the family that married into the family that signed the death warrant. If you ever get a chance to come to New Orleans, I would suggest you see the Destrehan Plantation and certainly go to the Whitney Plantation. It is quite a place to see. Let me tell you a little bit about Henry Glover. He was a very nice looking young black male, 31 years old, with 5 children. When Hurricane Katrina came in August of 2005, he elected to, in the local parlance, to ride it out, to stay home for a hurricane. It was a bad choice, because when 60-foot waves in the Gulf of Mexico arrived in New Orleans, the surge ahead of them broke the jello we call levees in 55 places. 80% of New Orleans was underwater, sometimes as much as 12 feet. For weeks in New Orleans, there were no lights and nobody moved. There wasn't anybody here. On September 2nd, 3 days after the hurricane, Henry Glover and his friend Calloway left friends and family to look for food and supplies. Or, according to other accounts, they went to a strip mall to retrieve suitcases of loot. Looting was extremely widespread. By this time, the remaining New Orleans police officers, some 200 had turned in their badges, had been deployed around the dry areas of the city. One of these officers was David Warren, a rookie police officer from Pennsylvania, who was guarding a police station in a strip mall from a second-story balcony. Warren was armed with his personal weapon, a hunting rifle with a scope. He testified that he saw 2 men, Calloway and Glover, looting, and fired a warning shot that somehow or other hit Mr. Glover in the chest and killed him. There was testimony that Glover had turned away from Warren and posed no threat, that Warren shot him in the back. When Glover was shot, a neighbor gathered him up and drove him to another police station for medical attention. Unfortunately, Mr. Glover died in the vehicle. Another officer took the car with Glover's body in it, drove it to a nearby Mississippi River levee, and burned it, making Glover's body inaccessible for forensic analysis of the entry wound. His body was found a week later. Warren, of course, complained he shot Glover in the chest, in the front, when he advanced on him. The only witness was Warren's police partner, a woman who was a complete basket case as far as a witness went. She was totally unable to testify. Warren was charged with manslaughter, convicted and sentenced by a judge, to show you what a small world it is, whose son played football with mine. Warren appealed, the conviction was reversed, and he was acquitted. He had two defense attorneys. Again, the small world aspect of New Orleans. One had been a mentor 40 years before, and the other was my law school roommate. I was one of a subset of three attorneys who represented Mr. Glover's teenage son. The three of us alternated shadowing the criminal trial. The civil matter never went to trial and was settled 11 years later in December of 2016. Afterwards, the New Orleans mayor, Mitch Landrieu, who was responsible for removing some of the Confederate statutes here in New Orleans, privately apologized to Mr. Glover's son. Mr. Glover's son was deeply affected by the death and the burning and abandonment of his father's body, as you might imagine. However, he had his sights set on college and seemed capable of successfully using the settlement money for that purpose. I don't know what became of him. I wanted to address for a minute the statement here that about remedies. I agree that national remedies are non-essential, and they're probably going to remain so. I do not agree that there is a national policy of the federal government that exacerbates the killings. Instead, it's a white supremacist culture that kills them. This has to be the culprit when over and over we see a black male killed by one local police department after another, each independent of the other and under no national control. I think the problem begins where the Minneapolis police chief said after the George killing that a lot of the remedy starts with hiring. He asked, how do I know I'm not hiring another Eric Chauvin, the officer who had killed George Floyd? How do you screen these folks out? David Warren had no business ever being a police officer, particularly in New Orleans, whose officers do have at least the annual nonviolent tradition called Mardi Gras, when the city puts its best foot forward. I do not know what provokes white police officers to kill black males. Whatever the basis for the culture, studies show that it sometimes even spreads like a cancer to black officers. Maybe it's fear. Studies show that humans are most afraid of snakes and react more quickly to snake pictures than to any others. It's occurred to me, why not use this technique to weed out the applicants who react more fearfully to images of the other, the whites who react more quickly to black pictures than to pictures of their own kind. More scientifically, one hiring consultant, Alan Friedman, PhD in Chicago, claims his hiring system has never hired a bad officer. Once in the field, however, a police officer has several layers of protection built into both the federal and state judicial systems. One is the nationally recognized split-second defense, where the officer says that he was surprised and had to react, draw his weapon and shoot the man. So often, the police officer seems to have created the very circumstances that he is invoking as a defense to having shot someone. However, to crack that defense requires expert testimony. That testimony can run several $1,000s. Very few of the do-good lawyers, solo practitioners, can afford that kind of expenditure. And rarely, if ever, can the plaintiff, victim, family afford that. A second problem is that in the federal system, police excessive force cases are referred to the magistrates. The magistrates serve for a period, a term of 8 years. They have to be picked by the senior district court judges in whatever federal district they serve. I have a feeling, I can't tell you this, that their appointment is scrutinized by the local sheriffs, and that they have a veto over that appointment and a possible veto over reappointment in 8 years. The original point behind the civil rights excessive force statutes was to take these cases out of the local jurisdiction, which were presumably more susceptible to local sheriff and law enforcement pressure, and insulate them in the federal system. However, because these cases are referred to the magistrates who do not have lifetime appointments, I think we have wound up someplace in right back where we were with the local courts trying these cases. A third thing I would note is that in Louisiana, you cannot try police officers before a jury. If you try these cases in state court, they are tried to the judge. Again, I think that presents us with an uphill battle. That's the sum of my statement. That describes the case, and that describes a few of the problems I've encountered in handling these cases.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson, for your description of the case and for your assessment of some of the systemic problems that repeatedly lead to, the shooting and killing of Black people, men, women, children, trans and cisgendered people across the country. And I appreciate your description of some of the potential solutions. At this point, I will turn it over to our Commissioner Fournier to ask any questions that he might have of our witness, Mr. Wilson. Commissioner Fournier.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Attorney Wilson. Yes, I have a couple of questions. Was there a public reaction to this person's assassination or killing?
I don't know. I can tell you that there was more of a reaction to his ultimate acquittal. That was really disappointing. And it traced its origin to the U.S. Department of Justice decision to try Mr. Warren with 2 other defendants. And his conviction was reversed on the basis of an improper joinder. And ultimately he was tried by himself and acquitted. So there was quite an unpleasant taste in everyone's mouth when he was ultimately acquitted, because it looked like it was a technical mistake that got him off.
Now that you speak about that, was the case the same for the 3 of the officers, or it was reversed only for one or some of them?
I don't know what happened to the other 2. I wasn't particularly interested in them. They were really bit players. They were one of them was the officer who drove Mr. Glover's car and his body to the levee, soaked it in, drove it to the levee, and then threw in a flare that, of course, blew up the car and burned the car and the body and made forensic analysis, particularly the chest wound, impossible. I don't know what became of him.
I read somewhere that his skull was removed. Was there any evidence of who did it, or does this had any weight on the decision of the judge?
I don't think that played into it at all. It was really a macabre footnote to this whole thing, but the real forensic evidence would have been the chest wound, whether it was whether the entry wound were in the front or the back, and that was impossible to determine after the burning.
You said that he was with another person in this, trying to obtain those goods from the supermarket. What happened to the other person?
Oh, Mr. Calloway, let's see. You know, I don't know. He was not a plaintiff, and he wasn't really called as a witness. He just sort of disappeared. He wasn't all that important. As I say, we just shadowed the criminal trial. We never really had to prepare this thing because it was obvious even from the acquittal that there was civil liability. And the mayor stepped up, did the right thing and settled. So we never really had to dig down into the case.
So probably you don't know either about another person, William Turner, whose car was the one that they set on fire.
Well, he got paid for his car. I do know that. But that was all Mr. Tanner got out of it.
Also, we heard here in Costa Rica and some other places in the world, of course, that after Hurricane Katrina, there were many abuses by the police. Do you know anything of the sort?
Well, there was one other high-profile related killing, and that was on the Danziger Bridge, which is a bridge over a canal in New Orleans, and that involved another completely unjustified shooting. There were terms of abuses. By police against civilians in relation to Katrina. I just read a 600 or 700-page book on the flood called Deluge, and I don't recall much in that book about police abuse. There were other aspects of the police performance that were covered in this book, but there was very little about police abuse of civilians. We heard a lot of crazy stories, but none of those stories panned out.
So you are not aware of some other cases like that of Mr. Glover?
No, the one that's well, I'm aware of one, which is what the so-called Danziger Bridge case, where a number of people were shot. But that's the only other case like that that I'm aware of growing out of Katrina.
Do you heard or could attend to what was relevant to the culpability of the officer or the New Orleans Police Department?
All right. I wasn't able to hear you because there was some background noise at my end. Would you repeat your question, please?
Yes, that, well, if you say there was at least another case you're aware of, so was that relevant to the culpability of the officer or any of the three officers or of the New Orleans Police Department itself?
No, it had no relevance whatsoever to my case. I think goes to the police culture is that it's not just a question of being trigger happy, they're scared and unreasonably so. And you just, I think that all goes back to hiring. Who do you trust? Who do you hire? You've got to hire non-racist people, and you've got to weed them out.
And do you know if there is a policy regarding that the decision by the police department and human resources, if they think about this that you just said?
You're asking me basically, am I familiar with their hiring procedures?
Hiring procedures, yes.
All right, I can tell you that I'm not, but I know that there's a very good hiring procedure implemented by this Professor Friedman that is not used in New Orleans. And so I think that's the best practice. And because it's not used here, I query is New Orleans following the best hiring practice.
Was there an independent civilian external review of the police use of force?
I don't know. I don't know. But my experience with the internal civilian review board in New Orleans is that it's ineffective.
So there is no board regarding that, an external civilian review.
There is, but I can tell you that the police abuse has become a more minor part of my practice. I do more and more employment discrimination cases, so I can't tell you whether there is or is not. If there is, it's never mentioned in the news. I don't hear about it.
So what is your opinion or your valoration of why did the justice system fail to Mr. Glover or his family because he had passed away?
Well, I think that with respect to the criminal prosecution of Mr. Warren, there was a threshold technical mistake made to join his trial with that of two other police officers who participated in the handling of Mr. Glover and the case after he was shot. So I think it was a technical failure. But ultimately, there was some justice delivered because the civil suits tracked the criminal prosecution, and they were settled favorably for the family.
Do you remember on what basis was the federal civil rights case overturned?
Yes, the basis for the appeal was misjoinder, that the cases should have been severed. Each officer should have been tried separately.
And I just want to interject here and note that we're at about 4:30 here on the Pacific time, 7:30 on Eastern, and we have about 20 or so, or 20 or less minutes are remaining in the hearing. Just for your information, Commissioner Fournier.
Thank you. Also, I have read that there is no statute of limitations regarding killing. Do you think, is there a possibility, as the family has been expected, so I read, that the officers might be held accountable by a criminal court?
I'm not quite sure I understood your question. One more time, please.
Yes. It seems in Louisiana there is no statute of limitation on killing. So even though so many years have passed, the families is still waiting for justice to be served. Then the question is there still nowadays a possibility that any of the officers might be held accountable by a criminal court?
Do you mean the officers in the Glover case?
Yes.
No, because they have all been tried and either convicted or acquitted, and to redo that would be double jeopardy.
Mr. Wilson, is it possible, just to clarify Commissioner Fournier's question, for there to be any, are all federal remedies, have they been exhausted? For example, the civil rights violations, or were the officers also tried for both both federal and state criminal offenses?
Let's see. The state deferred to the feds for the prosecution. And with respect to civil remedies, those have all been settled. So the matter is completely finished, both with respect to any criminal prosecution and any civil liability.
So the answer is no.
That's, if I understood your question, the answer is no. There are no further remedies of any sort.
Thank you. Pardon my intrusion, Commissioner. I'll return the questioning back to you.
We have seen in other cases analyzed by this commission that the officers allege that the deceased person was armed. Did this person had any arm on him, or did he try to attack the police?
Well, the first part of your question, he was not armed. And of course, Warren's testimony, particularly in the absence of contradicting forensic evidence, was that Glover approached him. Now, why Glover, unarmed, would approach armed policemen is beyond me, but that was Warren's testimony.
It was just an approach, not endanger the physical stability or the life of the officers.
That's what was claimed, but that testimony just, to me, seemed not credible.
Was there any video or of the incident? Like,
no.
They didn't wear body cams?
Oh no, that was. I'm not sure body cameras were on the scene then.
Do you know if the police tried to apply de-escalation tactics before the use of lethal force?
Well, Warren claimed that he fired a warning shot, but unfortunately, the warning shot hit Mr. Glover square in the torso from the front of the back. That was the extent of their de-escalation technique.
Was there evidence of that after his body was burned out?
No, you couldn't tell whether well, obviously you could tell that the warning shot was fatal. So that type of testimony seemed, again, not credible to me. And again, because the body was burned, there wasn't any way you could dispute forensically Warren's testimony that the man was advancing on him and threatening.
Returning to the civil case, so it is over as well as the criminal case.
Yes.
And there was no compensation to the family of Mr. Glover.
That's not correct. There was a very generous settlement funded by the city of New Orleans. And as I said afterwards, the mayor privately apologized to the family for what happened.
Right. He apologized, but there was a settlement, an amount of money was paid to the family.
That's correct.
Was there any possibility for the family and their lawyers to have any access to evidence available in state custody or in police custody?
Oh yeah. There's very, very thorough discovery of all the evidence.
When the case went to court, what was the response of the DA, of the prosecutorial side of the trial?
You mean once the trial opened, how did the U.S. attorneys respond? I'm not quite sure what your question is.
Yes, because well, in every case we have different sides, the defendant, the plaintiff, etc. So, and the prosecutor should prosecute the case. How was that attitude? How did they behave? Did they really try to get a conviction against the officers?
Oh, okay. Let me tell you, yes, they did. The Department of Justice brought in a special team of very experienced prosecutors to take the lead in this case, and the local U.S. attorneys supplemented the heavy hitters brought in by the Department of Justice. It was the Department of Justice applied a lot of resources to this prosecution. Yes.
All right. So you said that there was also an apology from who, the mayor or the city council?
No, the mayor himself.
The mayor himself. All
Right.
right. And was it public or private to the family?
It was private and not at all publicized. I just know about it because I'm one of the attorneys who handled the case.
And did he maintain his word about this apology? Because we saw another case on Wednesday that there was an apology and then it was retracted.
Oh, no. In fact, this mayor was very sincere in his apology and very consistent. And as a footnote, I will tell you that he removed some of the Confederate statutes here in New Orleans. The most prominent of which he removed was General Robert E. Lee in Lee Circle in downtown New Orleans. So he was very sincere about his apology.
All right. And apart from that, either him at the mayor's office or the police department did anything to change policies or patterns of police use of lethal force?
I don't know.
All right. Going to another side, there was a lot of covering by the media of the hurricane. How did the media cover about this case? How did they report about this case? Or was it blurred amongst all the incidents that happened?
Oh, no, this was very prominently covered. It was a major story for a long time.
And did that help in any ways improvement of the judicial cases?
I don't know. Presumably, anyone who had formed an opinion based on media exposure was weeded out from the jury. So I would say it probably theoretically had no effect on the prosecution of the case.
All right. Was there any possibility to acknowledge or demonstrate that somebody was lying about the initial narrative?
I think that got burned up with the car. That was the best way to demonstrate who was lying, because as I say, I knew both of the defense attorneys, and they were extremely skillful. They eviscerated the witnesses so that the forensic evidence would have been dispositive, but as I say, it was gone.
One last question, because I have read that the families are still waiting for justice. Do you think that these officers have been made accountable of their actions?
Everybody but Warren, yes. Warren, the chief culprit, got off. As I recall, most of the other people who were bit or minor players were held accountable to some degree or another. One officer escaped any kind of accountability. He claimed that he had been under too much stress during the hurricane and basically pled diminished mental capacity and was not held accountable. But most of the other officers were.
All right. And where is Warren now? Is he still working as a police officer?
He's no longer in New Orleans, as I understand it. He went back to Pennsylvania. He was dismissed from the police force.
He was dismissed.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. He's never been back as a police officer in New Orleans.
All right. Due to the Glover case.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's it.
All right. And what happened to MacRae and Mackey?
One of them was convicted. The other one was the one who pleaded mental instability because of the hurricane stress. I frankly always got them confused because there were two Irish guys, one Mac and the other one was Mac this and Mac that, and I can't tell you what happened to the two of them. I can't distinguish.
All right. I think that will be all from me. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Fournier, for your questions, and thank you, Attorney Wilson, for your responses and for your testimony. Given that the commissioner has no further question, that will conclude the hearing in the case of Henry Glover. We will now have a short break. We will resume on the hour, which would be 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, with the case of Kayla Moore. Again, I want to thank you, Mr. Wilson, for being here and talking about this case and helping us to better understand the circumstances that led to the murder of Henry Glover at the hands of Officer Warren, a member of the New Orleans Police Department. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We will stand in recess. We'll take a break till 5. Thank you all.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.